Ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by a commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, in this episode, I'm talking with a very impressive woman, Erin Crawford, from across our ocean, from the US, from the IBBA, which stands for the International Business Brokers Association. And we are talking today about the US perspective on business sales and acquisitions. Now, Erin has a lot of strings to her bow. She's a certified business intermediary. I think that's the word they use in the US for business broker, with more than a decade of experience. She's also on the IBBA board, and in 2025 is actually the IBBA chairperson. So there you go, a very busy person. And amidst all of that, she also teaches at IBBA on business brokerage, market valuations and transactions. Anyway, Erin and I in this topic cover some fantastically interesting topics ranging from the sell side to the buy side, the mindset of sellers and why trust is so important, and how to negotiate effectively in business transactions. Now, you've probably heard conceptually some of these topics before, but what I think is particularly interesting in this discussion is the comparison between the Australian and the US perspectives and processes. So anyway, let's get into our discussion with Erin. Erin, welcome on board to the Deal Room Podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you all the way from across the ocean. This is a bit exciting.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So we've got loads of topics that I want to cover. When we were initially talking, there were just 100 things that I thought we could talk about. Why don't we start with a bit of your background, like what you do, just grand, what are you doing right now, and how did you get to what you're doing right now?
Sure. So I actually started in the business brokerage world working for a franchisor. Transworld Business Brokers is their headquarters in West Palm Beach, which is where I live. And so I was working for basically the franchisor of that brand in 2011 to 2014. And I was in charge of marketing and franchise development, and discovered that I think I could have been pretty good at becoming at least an agent, if not a broker, myself. And I did not want to leave Florida. So Florida is the only state that you could not buy a franchise. So I ended up working as an agent underneath of Andy Cagnetta. And he's a great mentor, a great leader that I worked under when I was with Transworld for many years. So I became a business broker in 2014. I earned my CBI credentials in 2017. And then I began teaching classes a lot for the BBF, which is the Business Brokers of Florida. And then I got involved heavily with the IBBA, developed courses, trained and taught courses as well, and then got more involved with conference planning and other things like that as well. Really just have grown my career, and I now have my licenses with a company, CII Advisors, out of Florida. But I really work with one buying group, and so I actually went from the sell side over to the buy side, and that's actually pretty difficult to do because most buyers only buy one business. And now I'm working in the lower middle market and identifying transaction opportunities, basically the average between 3 million and 17 million is the range of the deal sizes that I'm currently acting as an intermediary for the buy side. That's in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Okay, and I want to talk about the IBBA and your involvement in the IBBA and how that runs. But before I do that, I just had a couple of things that are super interesting that I'd love to dig into a little bit more. Buy-side brokers here in Australia, there's not a lot of them. Here in Australia, predominantly sell-side. Is it the same in the US?
Exactly the same. Like I said, it's just not usually a market. Most buyers, not necessarily that they're all going to buy something, and when they do, they often just buy one business. So it's hard to stay with just the buy side. So I fortunately have teamed up with a buying group that is buying multiple companies, learning what they really have wanted over the years. I've been doing that now for 4 years, and I've helped them buy 17 companies in 4 years. So it's fun.
I love it. And what do you think, what's been the benefit of moving to buy side as opposed to sell side? What was that pull for you?
I'm really managing a process. I learned a whole lot that if I ever got back into the sell side, I could actually take a lot of what I've learned and apply it on the other side. So you really can learn the buying criteria of a group when you work hand in hand. And I understand what makes a business more attractive and what doesn't. And I've seen it in the due diligence side. We use a company for due diligence, so I'm not really doing due diligence myself, but overseeing the process and then understanding the mental piece that a lot of times I don't think brokers see that and don't understand the connection that has to happen. Because yes, we're in the deal business, but we're also in the psychology business. Personalities have to get along.
I say that all the time, Erin.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
Buyer and seller usually have to work together.
Well,
so.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I 100% agree with you. I also have a degree in psychology, and I just actually find that even more useful than my legal degree. Although, to be fair, I couldn't be a lawyer, obviously, without the legal degree. But it is all about the mental side. So, unpacking what you said there step by step, why don't we start with the mental piece? What is it that you've learnt about the mental side now that you're on buy side? You didn't know when you're on sell side.
Actions speak louder than words. And so a lot of times you can tell how people behave, what their true intentions are, right? We have contracts, we have legal. But when you start to see people start to behave differently, you can see where maybe they're trying to hide things or it's just not going to look like it's going to be a good fit post-closing too. And I think it's super important. The purchase agreements and the documents leading up to a transaction are really short-term. What really is long-term are those transition agreements, seller consulting agreements, management contracts, things like that, that govern that relationship for a very long time. So making sure that everybody has not equal skin in the game, but a dispersed amount of skin in the game in making sure that the business transitions. We're selling future performance based on historical performance in most of the transactions, right? That's why people buy businesses. Yeah. How do we preserve that and how do we make sure that it's somewhat fair? I love the old saying that says it's the best deal when no one's happy. Because
Well, I prefer to flip it and say, like, maybe if we can find a win, but that's the other way of looking at it, isn't it? But that is, I mean, it's a really good point. We will quite often deal with sellers who just, it's an emotional game for them as well. They'll get right to the end and they'll suddenly think, have I really got the best deal that's sitting here on the market? Should I push it a little bit more? But the thing is, when you have sellers who push on everything constantly, or buyers on the flip side, it just creates a really hard environment for that future relationship. I feel that's my opinion on it. Is that how you feel from the buy side? Is that the sort of things that you're seeing that create issues?
I'm going to take a saying that somebody else said, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but it was at the last conference. You can negotiate anything, but you can't negotiate everything. So I love that. Yeah. So I just think that, when you start to see, yes, they want a good deal, but it's also good to direct a seller into making sure that the buyer is a good buyer. Maybe somebody's going to overpay, but now they're going to go justify their transaction and get rid of half your staff. So is that really about protecting a legacy that's been built up over time? Or is that just about a financial number or a strategic buyer having it just basically looking at it from only a paper perspective and not the human element of it? So I think that's super important.
And so is there any, when you're talking, so you're talking about the seller choosing the right buyer at the moment, is there any coaching then that you give to your buyers or is this something you've learned through the behaviors that they already have?
I think I just learned throughout the whole process what is important to each party and figuring out where, hey, maybe we have a little bit of flexibility in this transaction on this aspect. Maybe it's on working capital structure. Maybe it's on closing timelines. What's super important for the person and where do we have room to negotiate and where do we have no room to negotiate? Let's put the deal breakers on the table first. If we can't get past that, we're dead in the water. So everybody's going to waste time.
Yeah,
I think it's just a process and every deal is different. I don't think there's any one thing that a buyer wants or the seller wants. I think it's the personalities you have to get to know and become a resource to both. They have to trust you. If they don't trust you, not going to happen.
But trust is critical, right? Absolutely critical. And really interesting that you talk about putting these deal breakers first, because one of the issues here in Australia, probably the same in the US, I don't know, there's this issue, brokers negotiated the deal, get the deal into contract, and then they have this issue if they've got lawyers on both sides who are just wanting to nitpick through every single deal, every single component together. And one of the things that I say that I think is really important is that whether you're acting for the buyer or seller, that you clearly have an issues list, but then you prioritize it. So you have the most important things first and you have the rats and mice second. And I think that's the reason why so many negotiations, once they get to legal phase here in Australia, have issues, because lawyers don't really have training here in how to run good negotiations. And I don't know, business brokers may not either.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.